This is my 1986 Pontiac Fiero GT, a car I didn't even know existed until about 5 months ago, and now I own one. I absolutely fell in love with this car the very first time I laid my eyes on it, and after finishing my last project car for a friend, I began searching for one. I searched for one on Marketplace, Craigslist, Auto Tempest, you name it, I checked it. I was trying to find something under $1,000 and I just couldn't find any, as these Fieros are significantly going up in value. The ones in good condition are going anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000, and that was just not in my price range. I checked the sites every day for about 4.5 months and nothing affordable was popping up. And then 2 weeks later, I came across this. They wanted $1,500 for it, and even though they were 200 miles away from me, I messaged the owners. I asked them, does it run and drive? Does it have any known issues? And does it have a clean title? The owners replied, yes, it runs and drives, however it does not rev over 3,000 RPM, which they claim was due to a bad map sensor. And yes, it does have a clean title. I let the owners know that I was very interested in purchasing the car and then asked them if they would sell it for $1,000, to which they responded, yes, we can do that. So the next day, I got in my car and I drove up to Green Bay, Wisconsin, rented a trailer, and proceeded another 20 additional miles to see the car. Upon my arrival, they tried swapping in 2 different batteries and neither could get the car to start, which was fine by me. It cranked, so that meant the engine wasn't seized. And personally, I wanted to experience the rush of getting the car started for the first time. So then, I asked them, with all the issues this car has, would you consider $800 in its current condition? And after they discussed my offer amongst themselves, they agreed. And then they proceeded to help me push the car onto my rented trailer. We then exchanged the paperwork and they gave me some spare parts that they had lying around. Now I would have loved to film this for you guys, but it completely slipped my mind as I was just too excited about the car. I did however capture these photos of the car on my trailer while I stopped to fuel on my way back home. Now some of you may be wondering why I chose a Fiero. Well, I'll put it out there right away. The first time I found out about these cars was from watching Ronnie Finger's Fiero restoration videos. So thanks YouTube for recommending that first video to me. His series inspired me to get my own project car. However, I never really liked the look of the non-GT models, so for me it had to be a GT. And the reason I chose this specific Fiero was because it needed a lot of work, and for only $800, I just couldn't pass up on it. I've been working on cars since I was 6 years old, but never something as big as trying to get a car started. Just regular maintenance like oil changes for example. I've also developed quite a love for bodywork, which I believe I'm pretty good at. Here are some before and after pictures of things I've worked on. With that out of the way, this will be a series of videos, and my eventual goal for this series is to bring this car back to life. And I hope whoever is watching this series enjoys it just as much as I'm going to enjoy making it. With that being said, let's get right into the video. It is now the next morning and I started my day off by getting a better look at the car and then realizing what exactly I just purchased. I started by examining the exterior of the car first. The hood, fenders, doors, roof, deck lid, and rear clip all look to be in decent condition, and that's because all these panels were made from fiberglass and or plastic, which does not rust. However, some of the molding, some people refer to it as trim, was either broken off or missing, and some of it was plastic welded, at least that's what it looked like to me. One of the side skirts was cracked and broken, and the passenger side door had a crack in the fiberglass panel. As for the mirrors, they both have faded and damaged paint, and both will need to be repainted. And speaking of paint, there are paint chips and scratches everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Moving on to the rear of the car, the bumper wasn't properly attached to the taillights considering this massive panel gap between the two, and only half of the Pontiac lettering lights up. However, I did check this off camera, and it was just a case of missing bulbs. Hopefully. As for the rubber seals around the windows, I believe they are called dew wipes. They were both in really rough shape, and basically just falling apart. And speaking of rubber, all 4 tires look to be in good condition with still a decent amount of tread left. As for the wheels, they're in pretty good shape as well. There's some curb rash but nothing too bad. I do have all 5 lug nut covers on each wheel, so I guess that should suffice for the damage on the wheels. Yeah, no. Repairing these wheels isn't going to be fun, but I have repaired and painted wheels before on my channel, which will be linked on the end screen and in the video description below if you want to check that video out. Now let's check out what kind of engine we're dealing with here. Let me just open this door. Pop the hood. And let me just lift this up so I can show you the end. Where's the damn engine? Just kidding. If you already didn't know, this car, along with every other Fiero made from 1984 up until 1988, which was its last production year, had the engines in the rear of the car. That's right, all of them were mid-engine vehicles. But we'll get to the engine in a second. As you can see, under the hood looks pretty good. There was some leaves on the cowl here, but I already vacuumed those up. And it looks like we do have the OEM jack and spare tire, which is a huge plus, as I'm sure the original jack would be a bit pricey to replace. And well, that's pretty much all I needed to show you under the hood, so let's go to the back and check out this engine. This is a 2.8 liter V6 that only made around 140 to 150 horsepower, which isn't a lot by today's standards. As for the engine bay, it looks alright, but there's a lot of rusty components that will have to be dealt with eventually, as well as the rust underneath the car. As for the trunk cargo area, the carpeting was extremely dirty, and the rubber piece that goes around it was torn apart, or maybe just melted from engine heat. And at some point, duct tape was used to hold it together. With that being said, that's the outside of the car, under the hood, and deck lid inspected. Now, let's check the interior out. Starting with the door panels, they look to be in great condition in my opinion. Sure, they could use some cleaning, but nothing too bad. All the buttons work, as well as the door handles. Well, kind of. Speaking of things that kind of work, the windows work about as well as an ice cream machine from a certain fast food restaurant. As for the seats, they will need to be reupholstered as there are rips and the usual wear and tear on both of them. The seat rails will also need to be addressed, as this amount of rust might be a safety hazard. The carpets on the other hand look to be in great shape, albeit just a little dirty. The dash doesn't look too bad either, other than around the air vents, which has some plastic chipping off. And speaking of plastic, something that usually happens on these cars is that the center armrest / glove box begins to warp over time. I'm guessing that's due to the heat coming from the engine or the ECM, which is directly behind this panel. As for the center console, all the buttons for the heating and cooling work just fine. And the car does have heat. However, the knob to adjust between cold and hot is kind of hard to maneuver. And surprisingly, the radio still works. However, I don't have any cassettes to test that feature out, but I'm sure that works just fine too. On the subject of knobs, the manual mirror adjuster knob doesn't really do anything when moving it. And as for the passenger side, I actually don't know if there's a knob for it, as I couldn't find one. In the 88 and I believe 87 models, there was a directional pad here to adjust it, but as you can see, I don't have that. I guess I'll just stick to manually adjusting it for now unless someone knows where the knob or button is. Let me know in the comment section below. Speaking of things that were hard to find, the fuel door release lever that was oddly located behind the driver's seat on the B-pillar still actually works. And another oddly placed item would be the handbrake, which does work as well, however the odd placement would interfere with trying to exit the vehicle. But Pontiac thought about that. They allow you to pull up the brake, engage it, and push it back down so you can exit the Fiero. Now, onto the sun visors, and both look okay. However, the mirror on the passenger side visor just keeps falling out. I'm not sure how it's attached, but I'll look into it at some point. As for the driver's side visor, minus this rusted screw, it looks to be in decent shape as well, and even has the instructions on how to start the car. The reason Pontiac did this was because the car was fuel injected and didn't need to be given gas when trying to start it, as opposed to the carbureted engines which sometimes did. So Pontiac placed this here so people wouldn't damage the engine when trying to start it up. As for the sunroof, it does open and close as intended, and it did somewhat rain the other day and I didn't notice any leaks, so I guess the seals are still good. Now the only two things left for me to show you on the interior is the deck lid release button, which also still works. And the other thing is located just to the left of the steering wheel, and it's probably my favorite button on this car, and this is what it does. With that being said, that's everything I could show you about the exterior and interior of the car, so now, let's try to get it started. The first thing I did was go out and get a brand new battery. I then added a liberal amount of battery terminal protector and then dropped it into the non-existent tray that's meant to secure the battery in place. I then proceeded to connect the two positive and negative terminals to it, and something tells me I should have connected the positive terminal first. After installing the battery, I went to try and start the car. It sounded like it wanted to start so bad. And after trying multiple times, it just wouldn't start. So now it was time to do some troubleshooting. A car needs 5 things in order to start. Those 5 things are fuel, air, spark, compression, and timing. The first thing I checked for was air. I did this by opening up the air filter housing to check the air filter, and this is what I found inside. That's not okay. Something tells me this might be the original air filter. A 34-year-old air filter. Can you imagine that? So much for it ran and drove. Thanks, previous owner. I think this car has been sitting for years, or very, very neglected. After I saw this, I immediately went out and bought a new air filter and then proceeded to install it. I also made sure that the hose was clear and free of any debris off camera. And after placing the new filter in, I went to try and start the car again.
Alright, let's go ahead and try to start it again. I can get the key to go in. Okay. I can hear the fuel pump. Let's see if it'll start. Come on. Oh, it wants to start so bad.
It wants to so bad. But there was something else wrong. So next, I went to check for fuel pressure. Now I could hear the fuel pump priming, but I wanted to see if the injectors were working and if there was fuel pressure. So I went to my local auto parts store and rented a fuel pressure tester, which was around $170, which you do get refunded as soon as you return it. And after hooking it up to the Schrader valve, I had my wife try to turn on the ignition.
Okay, go ahead.
And that got nothing. Then I had her try to crank it.
Okay.
And still nothing. So now I know that I don't have fuel pressure, and that could be a bunch of different things. The first thing I did was take off the intake plenum and remove the fuel rail, which I guess I didn't hit the record button for because I didn't get any footage of it, so I guess you'll just have to take my word for it. But now that I have everything off, I wanted to clean the injectors and see if they actually work. And in order to clean the injectors, I had to make this little contraption. To make this, you will need a tubeless tire valve, a valve stem remover tool, the straw from a brake cleaner can, a set of alligator clips, a 9-volt battery, a drill bit that's the same size as your brake cleaner straw. You'll also need a lighter, and last but not least, a drill. First, you want to remove the cap and use your valve stem remover tool to remove the stem from the inside of the valve. Now you want to take your drill with the appropriately sized drill bit and drill a hole in the center of the cap. Then slide the straw through the cap and melt off the end of the straw that's on the open side of the cap using a lighter. After you've melted it, quickly slide the straw through. But don't pull too hard, just enough so that it creates a seal to the cap. Now screw the cap back onto the tubeless tire valve, and now you have a tool to clean your injectors with. Next, get your 9-volt battery, connect the black alligator clip to the negative side, and the red to the positive side. Then connect the clips to the 2 prongs on the injector. You can leave the negative clip on or just connect it when you're about to spray. When you connect it, you'll hear a click on the injector that sounds just like this, which means the injector is now in the open position. Then grab your homemade injector cleaner tool and place the side with the valve stem on the injector and the side with the straw onto your brake cleaner can and spray away to clean them. But don't spray a lot as the straw tends to fall off. Just a spritz is fine. Now I did this to all 6 injectors and they all worked and had a consistent and steady spray pattern like this one. After cleaning them, I replaced all the O-rings and then placed the injectors back on the fuel rail and then attached the rail back to the block. Then I plugged in all the electrical connections to each injector. I also made sure to number these connectors prior to removing them so they all went back in the exact same spot. Now I should mention, while these injectors do seem to be working just fine, I have ordered new ones and a new fuel rail to block seal as well as a brand new fuel pressure regulator. But for now, I just went ahead and put everything back together and went to try it one more time. But it still won't turn on. So now it was time to check for spark. I got this spark tester from my local auto parts store and plugged one end to the spark plug and the other end to the coil from the distributor cap. Then I cranked the engine and checked for spark. And no spark either. Then I started questioning myself, because the night before I cranked the engine and my dad said he saw a spark on the plug while he had it grounded. And we also checked for fuel pressure by cranking the engine and just using a screwdriver to depress the Schrader valve, and we had fuel squirting out. However, as I said, I was the one cranking the engine, so I actually didn't see any of that happen, only my dad did. But I did see the fuel around the Schrader valve afterwards. So that's why I was kind of shocked when checking it with the fuel pressure tester, and now I come to find there's no spark either. So after replacing all 6 spark plugs, yes, including the 3 in the back that cut my hand open in multiple places, I also replaced the ignition control module, the distributor cap, and the ignition coil. And soon I was just buying and replacing stuff. I also replaced the map sensor that the previous owner said was bad with a brand new one. And after all of that, I went to check for spark again. And still nothing. I also checked for spark from the coil to the cap. And no spark there either. So at this point, I went to test a brand new ignition coil with a multimeter off camera and determined that it was not working properly. So I figured that was the problem, the ignition coil. I went back to the parts store and they didn't have the same coil in stock. However, they had one that was $30 more. And at this point, I was getting frustrated, so I was going to pay it. And then the guy says, for all your troubles and because you've been in here about 20 times today, it'll be an even exchange. So to the guy at my local auto parts store, whose name I won't reveal, thank you. After getting home, I swapped in the new coil and then tried testing for spark again. And still no spark. At this point, I'm already frustrated and now stumped. I kept telling myself, please don't let it be a wiring issue. Please don't let it be a wiring issue. Please don't let it be a wiring issue. And then I found this. Yep, it's a wiring issue. So now I needed to replace this as well. And after calling all the auto parts stores in my area and finding out none of them would have one until tomorrow if they ordered it today, I increased my search radius and ended up finding one 20 miles away. So I jumped in my car, drove the 20 miles there, picked up the new connector, and then drove the 20 miles back home. And here it is now. Except it only has one connector, so now I had to splice it into the other one. I started by stripping the wires, then placing 2 heat shrink tubes on them. Then I proceeded to tie the wires together in hopes that I was tying the correct wires to each other, as all 4 were different colors. I then got my lighter and heat shrinked it all together. Now I have a replacement connector. So I plug that back in. Check for spark again. And finally, spark. Now all that's left to do is to try and start the car again. With every crank of the engine, I kept telling myself, please don't let it be a timing issue, as that would have been a huge pain to fix. But now that it had spark, the engine was cranking a little different. And after ignoring Pontiac's starting instructions and giving it a little gas while cranking, this happened. It finally started. I was so happy at this point. And like I said in the beginning of the video, deep down inside, I was hoping it wouldn't start when I went to go and buy it, just so I could experience this rush of doing it myself and getting it started for the first time. So, I got the car started. Now what? Well, after letting it run for some time, all the smoke cleared out, and now I think it's time to see if it drives. And as you can see, it does. Rough, but it does. Now I have a running and driving Fiero GT. So what's next? Maybe giving this car a new lease on life. Or maybe, just maybe, it's time for a Fiero Resurgence. And I'm really looking forward to that. And at least, there's nothing else wrong with the car. Okay, let me go shut off this engine real quick before this car catches on fire. I said, let me shut off the engine. Son of a...